Hey everyone, welcome back to Data Driven Health Radio. And today we are honored to have Mr. Len Pastrano on the show with us here today. Len is the founder and CEO of New BioAge, which is a platform for educating practitioners on cellular medicine compounds and supplements. Among other things, New BioAge runs case studies on tracking outcomes for various cellular medicine compounds. And we're just honored to have Len on because he's definitely one of the studs in the game. And he's not an easy guy to get a hold of, but he has incredible expertise. So, Len, thanks, man. I know we've been trying to schedule this for quite some time, and I'm glad we finally made it happen.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I know you know what's busy because you're pretty busy yourself.
Yeah, we're both out there building our companies. I know just before we got on here, you were telling me about a new project you're working on that's just kind of sent you down the late night rabbit hole. And for us, it's the same thing, figuring out how can we build heads up and we get these great ideas and we go down the rabbit holes, So we're both kind of building our vision and our dream, which is such an opportunity in life to be able to really invest your time and energy on something that you're so passionate about. So it doesn't feel like work, honestly.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And it was just, always wasn't like that. And that's pretty special. Not everybody gets to do that,
Yes,
in this
agreed.
life. And so definitely very
Yeah.
grateful for the opportunity to do that.
Len, we're going to dive into the body composition stacks that you presented on some of your educational platforms. I think there's incredible knowledge in there for people out there who are looking at just changing the composition of their body, losing fat, building muscle. That's something that never ends for people. And as your body ages, what used to work for you at one point in your life needs to change based on how your body changes, your metabolism changes, your cellular processes change. So there's a lot of stuff we can unpack, and there's an incredible stack that I think we can dig into that I've really found powerful for my own use. I know you have as well. But before we dive into all the nitty gritty, maybe you can educate us just a little bit on your background as a pharmacist and how you got into healthcare. I know you've got a personal story that you've shared a bit about with your own body recomposition journey. So just give us an update on your background in healthcare and how you got into cellular medicine, and then we'll dive into the topic of the day.
Sure. Yeah. So I am a pharmacist. I worked, for a long time in your traditional retail setting, like CVS pharmacy, which is a really, really tough job. I hated it. I stayed there way too long. It was not what I expected, when I was done with pharmacy school, just like kind of handing out band-aids every day, never seeing anybody get, any better really. It just really wasn't rewarding, and I found that I needed to get out of there. And I got into more clinical positions, working as a clinical pharmacist in the hospital. I enjoyed that a lot more, for sure. It was much more interesting. It was much more fulfilling. But even there, something felt missing, just because you'd go into work and you see a 50-year-old patient, and the entire screen was filled with all the medications that they were taking, when they got in, before they even got into the hospital, right? And it's like, where do we even start here? And
Yeah.
so I kind of got a little bit disinterested in healthcare in general, just because I was just looking for something just more fulfilling, right? And I kind of got away from healthcare, and I was looking for other avenues. I got into self development and entrepreneurship, and was looking for a career change, really. And at that point, I had become obese. I was, about 60 pounds heavier than I am now. And as I was learning from other entrepreneurs and learning from other people, I realized they were very fit, and I realized that they had better advice for me when it came to, how to be healthy, or how to have more energy, and how to operate at a higher level than most of my colleagues in healthcare. And that's when I started to make a change in my life, and got into a healthy form of living. But I thought I was done with healthcare in general, until I met up with a friend of mine that I went to pharmacy school with, that had an independent pharmacy. And he told me something about peptides, that he saw his patients were coming in and refilling them over and over again, and he said that it was getting better results than he had seen in a long time. And I got interested, and he gave me the login to one of his peptide certification courses, and I logged in, to just understand one of the peptides a little bit better. And it just, completely changed my life once I got there. I realized there's this other side of medicine where there's these, very intelligent physicians and researchers talking about the biochemistry of,
Mhm.
of medicine. But not only that, but they were incorporating nutrition and exercise, and they were describing medicine in a completely different way. One that I can really get behind, because at this point I'd already had some success, but it was mostly due to improving my lifestyle and a couple supplements here and there. And that's when I was introduced to peptide therapy. It was completely different from anything that I had learned as a pharmacist. As a pharmacist, you're usually, learning about medications where they bind to a specific receptor, and you're kind of just, you're dealing with a lot of side effects. You're just managing the disease state. You're not really reversing anything. You're not really preventing any, further complications. I mean, maybe you're preventing some further complications, but it was like kind of a lifelong long thing, and like a band-aid, like I mentioned. And I love the aspect of utilizing these peptides, even short term, or cycling them to get people back to an efficient state, back to where they were when they were younger. And it's been 4 years since then. I've basically been, every second of my life has been dedicated to this, because it's just been so much fun. And at some point, I had to start a business around it, because my wife's asking me why I'm going from conference to conference to conference. And the thing that I realized, the biggest gap in this, was that there's a big gap between the clinical research and the studies and medical practice, and how these things can be used clinically. And that's where
Yeah.
when we created New BioAge, to kind of fill that gap and help practitioners understand what compounds are available, the molecular biology and the biochemistry behind how they work, and how you can develop specific protocols for your patients, and how to improve outcomes. And then that's gone into a bunch of different projects, from case studies to formulating specific supplements that go well with peptides, to just evaluating the research a little bit more. And so it's been a rabbit hole, but it's been so much fun, and really rewarding.
Awesome, man. I think you landed in the perfect spot that kind of pulls together all of your formal training and your personal passions and where you want to see healthcare going. And that's a lot of the same reasons why Heads Up exists. It's because we need ways to measure that this stuff is working the way it's supposed
Yeah.
to work. And I saw an opportunity out there. I stepped back from my corporate career in in IT, similar to you, looking to find something that was more rewarding. And I had been doing a lot of the health optimization and the biohacking stuff. And then I said, well, for me, I don't have the medical training. I'm a technologist. So for me, it was,
Yeah.
how can I provide something that the average person who's not necessarily super tech savvy can use to effectively manage their health? And if they're going to try different interventions that are a little bit outside of the mainstream, then how do you know that you're moving the needle in the right direction? So, similar to you, got into building Heads Up. I know you've been following our system now for a while. You kind of jumped in when we were first building it a few years ago, and you've been
Yeah.
following along. So it's good to be collaborating with you, both at the level of helping you with the outcomes research that you do, and then also now being able to collaborate with you on platforms like this. Len, it was the educational series that you did with SSRP, which
Mhm.
was, for me as a technology person, not a medical person. Medically speaking, I'm a lay person. But the way you broke down the biochemical pathways involved with weight loss was
Mhm.
the first time I'd seen it laid out so accessible to me as just a normal person trying to figure out the weight loss algorithm. I like to call it an algorithm because the algorithm's different for everybody. So like I'm trying to figure out the algorithm, right? For me, for Dave, just like you did when you were trying to lose it all. And so the way you broke it down, you broke down the pathways, and then you broke down, okay, here's all the different ways we can hit these pathways using peptides, using supplements, using very specific kinds of exercise, and here's why it all works. So it was just awesome. And I thought we could spend the rest of the show just educating other people out there who are working on body recomposition, getting bits and pieces of it from here and there, but hoping maybe to fill in some of the blanks for those listening who want to really maximize their results with keeping the fat off and staying lean and strong and fit and healthy as they get older and into all phases of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I really like to hear that, because it's something that, I sit around thinking a lot about, as to, there's all this great information, but how do we relay this information to patients? How do we relay this information to physicians? Because it can sound complicated. And one of the things I like to do is bring it back to the basics of things that everybody's already felt or experienced, right? So, and it's this concept behind cellular intelligence, and leveraging the intelligence of your cells. And everybody's kind of already felt the way that this feels. So if you've ever done exercise for a consistent amount of time, you've probably felt a clarity of mind. You've felt some improvements in body composition. You just feel better, even if you caloric restrict, or you've done any fasting for any period of time. You probably felt this, the clarity of mind, changes in body composition, and that's cellular intelligence. That's your body or your cell's ability to recognize a deficit of energy, right? And it's the sensor for this is something called AMPK, and it's your cells recognizing this deficit in energy, and then there's just all these downstream effects that happen because of that. And NAD's involved, a lot of the buzzwords that you hear, like NAD, SIRT1, but really it's leveraging those same pathways. Because when you look a lot of peptides, you look at a lot of supplements, what they're trying to do, even some pharmaceuticals, what they're trying to do is mimic what happens in our bodies when we caloric restrict, or when we exercise.
Nice.
We're hitting the same pathways. And so
That's a really helpful way to think about it, Len.
Yeah, and that's really what it really boils down to. And even something like NAD, right? NAD is this big topic. It's a longevity molecule. It's X, Y, it's X and Z. It increases energy. Well, do you take NAD precursors? Do you take IV NAD? It's not going to be a fad. Maybe what you take or how you consume NAD is going to be a fad, but NAD is never going to leave, because NAD is a core process of all these cellular mechanisms that have to do with a number of things, anywhere from immune function to DNA repair to weight loss to cellular efficiency. So we're never going to stop talking about NAD, but I think the conversation kind of gets in the wrong direction when we start talking about, well, what's the right precursor to use, or what's the right should we use IV NAD, subcutaneous NAD? Really what we should be doing is leveraging the body, the cell's own intelligence on how it's supposed to use NAD. And what makes NAD so important is that it's sirtuins, right? So sirtuins are NAD dependent deacetylases, right? And so sirtuins, known as longevity genes, are they technically longevity genes? Not really, but if you look, it's really all the downstream effects of what happens when you activate things like SIRT1. But the core principle here is that you can't activate SIRT1 without NAD. It's NAD dependent. This is one of the many things that makes NAD so important. But what happens when we activate SIRT1? Well, this is where we have all those same pathways that we see in exercise. You have the activation of stuff called things like PGC1 alpha that's in charge of fat oxidation. You have PGC1 alpha is also in charge of our body's ability to upregulate its own antioxidant enzymes. It has a lot to do with mitochondrial biogenesis, not just how your mitochondria is functioning, but the density of your mitochondria. And it has a multiple downstream effects when it comes to inflammation and a number of other gene transcription factors. And that's when you can go down the rabbit hole of really understanding the biochemistry behind it. But really, that system is a system that everybody, pharmaceutical companies, supplement makers, peptides, are all leveraging, that system. And if you can start there and understanding it, you can really start looking at each individual peptides and seeing, well, how is this peptide converging on these pathways? And for us, we started with weight loss, of course, because so many practitioners were trying to help their patients, lose weight. And so it started with weight loss, but what we realized, it's more about metabolism, and it's not really about weight loss. It's about body composition, right? Looking at somebody's BMI or looking at how many pounds somebody wants to lose doesn't do anything for us. And especially the conversations that we have, with physicians, right? So we're having more clinical conversations, not person needs to lose 10 pounds or 20 pounds. That's not the way that we're looking at things. We're analyzing patients' risk for certain disease states. we're analyzing their body composition as to their muscle mass versus their fat tissue versus their visceral fat. These are all the things that we're, we're contemplating when we're making decisions on how we want to attack this. And we're not really attacking weight loss. What we're attacking is improved metabolism. All right, because metabolism has everything to do with insulin resistance. It has everything to do with the prevention of diabetes and obesity, because those are the prerequisites for everything that's taking us out, like cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, cancers, right? So we're not really necessarily talking about weight loss. We're talking about longevity. If you're just thinking about weight loss, you're kind of missing the boat. Anybody can
Yep.
restrict their calories and lose a bunch of weight really quick. But what are you doing for your long-term health? Have you improved your exercise capacity? Have you improved? Have you delayed the onset of chronic diseases? There's so much. You can start off with weight loss, but you can really develop protocols and programs for patients that are lifelong, that have to do more about health span and longevity. And it's not they're not two completely different subjects. They're the same subject. But yeah, I can get into a couple of these different concepts around body composition or peptides or supplements. Just let me know which kind of which direction you want to start with.
Well, you and I have been kind of like jamming back and forth on like this super stack, and like the
Yeah.
super stack for me, the foundation of the super stack would be understanding GLP-1. So I'd like to talk about that, and then the GHRH, GHRP. So those are the growth hormone. Leucinergy. I think it'd be important to understand how that works. Um, MOTS-c, BPC, and then exercise and caloric restriction. So, like when I watched your course, I started implementing each level of the stack. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, I couldn't take MOTS-c. That one actually turns out to be one that I did not have a positive reaction to. But that stack to me is the one I'm still using today, and getting incredible results. So let's first of all maybe just talk about GLP-1, and I'm going to try to remember some of the lingo from the course you did, Len. Now I may butcher this as the tech nerd here, but the GLP-1 is both insulin dependent, so it's kicking in after you eat, and it's also insulin independent, which means it's working on pathways, energy pathways, not necessarily related to food consumption. So, like, how the heck do these things work? And I'll frame it up by saying, you said it beautifully. We're trying to uh, emulate the cell's own intelligence in for example, an energy deficit scenario, which kicks in
Mhm.
these different reactions. So I know that we could probably spend the whole show just talking
Yeah.
about GLP-1, but at a high level, what are these doing? How do they work? And how do those serve as like the foundation of the stack? And then we'll layer on from there.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm glad that that was your take home message there, because it's absolutely, I think, one of the most important parts when people talk about GLP-1s. They obviously know that one of the main functions is that it secretes insulin in response to high glucose levels, and this is so important, especially when people are eating. It's like postprandial insulin secretion. So when
Yeah.
your glucose is going up after you've eaten, that's when it modulates that release of insulin that brings glucose into the cell, properly. And that's one of its main benefits. That's why it was studied. It was initially studied in neurodegenerative diseases, because they were looking at that specifically in neurodegenerative diseases. But they saw how much it was reducing glucose levels and hemoglobin A1C, and then it became something for diabetes. But then with its appetite suppression and things like that, it became more of a weight loss drug. So that was kind of the cycle of how it happened. But what most people don't talk about is that its insulin independent effect of glucose disposal. So one of the other things that GLP-1s can do is they can activate AMPK. And there comes that word again. AMPK is that nutrient sensor. And it's an insulin independent way of bringing glucose into the cell. Because when you activate AMPK, just like you do with exercise, you translocate something called GLUT4, and that's what transports glucose into the muscle cell. And so you can do that through exercise, and that's another function of GLP-1s, that they translocate GLUT4 and bring glucose into the cell independent of insulin, which is amazing. And just so you can get a frame with this, if you think about even patients that are type 1 diabetic, they have to change the way that they do their insulin around exercise. Because even in insulin resistance patients, when you exercise, you improve that GLUT4 transport, and you can improve your glucose disposal, right? That's why exercise is so important for so many different reasons, but it's almost like a natural way of disposing of glucose. So GLP-1s do insulin dependent, insulin independent. They also work on improving fat oxidation through a number of different mechanisms. I think this is a good part to start bringing in something like Lucinergy, or the supplement Lucinergy, or the research behind low dose leucine. And so leucine is usually something that you think of as, anabolic, or something that improves protein synthesis. Usually like bodybuilders and stuff will take that post workout to improve their muscle gains, or their improvement in protein synthesis. But there's some really interesting research about what leucine does at low levels. So at low doses of leucine, you can actually activate SIRT1 without activating mTOR, the anabolic side of things. And they found that a dose between 1 and 1.5 grams of leucine decreases the km of NAD. Now, if you remember, I said recently that, SIRT1 is dependent, it's NAD dependent, the acetylase. So it's dependent on the amount of NAD for it to be activated. So if you can reduce the amount of NAD needed to activate SIRT1, you're really improving your endogenous NAD utilization just by using this amino acid in a low dose. And so this same platform, these same researchers looked at combining this low dose of leucine with a number of different things. They were combining it with metformin and sildenafil for like triglycerides and weight loss. They were combining it with nicotinic acid for cardio protection. But some of the more interesting for what we're talking about here is that they had some studies combining it with resveratrol, very small doses of resveratrol, and showing that they can improve insulin and glucose dynamics and insulin resistance. They also combined it with things like pyridoxine, and they had studies in obese patients where they can show an increase in fat tissue loss, which is exactly what we're looking for. And so that's why we put together these compounds of leucine, resveratrol, B6 to improve that SIRT1 activation. Why? Because we want to enhance all those gene transcription factors that have to do with fat oxidation, have to do with the upregulation of antioxidant enzymes and the ability to decrease inflammation. We also wanted to have that insulin independent way of glucose disposal, really converging on all the same pathways that GLP-1s converge on. And that's why most of the practitioners we work with, they'll use something like Lucinergy with any GLP-1 that they're using. It's almost like the standard for them. That's like a really good place to start when it comes to just glucose control and weight loss. And that's where we start. And now,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I remember when we met in Las Vegas, Len, we ran into each other at the conference there. You had Lucinergy available, and that's before I had really educated myself at all on any of this stuff. But now I understand how it works biologically. So what we're doing here is we're just helping people understand how they can stack to continue to get better results. So you layer in that GLP-1, you layer in Lucinergy, which is going to continue to amplify the benefits of lipolysis, of the way we manage glucose, the way we manage energy. So that was the second one I wanted to talk about, was the Lucinergy product. I'm going to take a selfish moment here, Len, because I take the Lucinergy every day, and I keep meaning to ask you, do you take it empty stomach or with food?
So the first dose we take in the morning is on an empty stomach, where you're in that
Okay.
fasted,
Fasted.
caloric
Yeah.
restricted state, and you're already doubling down, on a lot of those pathways. And then the
Yep.
second dose, we decide to take it, is usually 90 minutes after lunch, or 90 minutes after the first meal of the day, if you're intermittent fasting. And
All right.
so,
Good to know.
yeah, so yeah.
All right. So we've got GLP-1. We've talked about Lucinergy, low dose leucine. One other thing that we should mention is, especially for people who are looking to either preserve lean mass or build lean mass, while they're also trying to work on fat loss, energy reduction, metabolic health. Inevitably, when fat comes off, there's a little bit of muscle that's going to come along for the ride. But
Mhm.
can we either minimize that, or maybe and this is the needle I'm trying to thread. I'm trying to thread the needle to say, can I actually increase the lean mass
Mhm.
while the fat is coming off. So, how would you describe leveraging the growth hormone peptides in the stack at this point?
Sure. And so you bring up a great point, and also a really big misconception, and especially with GLP-1s. Now, in anything that we've ever done for weight loss, if someone's losing weight rapidly, muscle comes off usually if certain things aren't happening, right? So if they're not doing resistance training, if they're not taking the right amount of protein, if they're not staying hydrated, yes, of course, muscle loss can happen. But the problem and the big misconception is that people are relaying that to like the GLP-1s, or like the mechanism of GLP-1s. There's no mechanism in a GLP-1 that's actually causing muscle loss. We actually have
It's
studies
just
showing that.
technique.
Yeah, well, we actually have studies saying the opposite as well. There's studies showing that GLP-1s can be anabolic to skeletal muscle, so they're improving blood flow to muscle. So
That makes
they're
sense.
actually beneficial to muscle. So if you can utilize GLP-1s while making sure someone stays hydrated, while they have sufficient protein intake, and they are doing resistance training, you can put muscle on. And this is one of the great things that we're utilizing your platform right now, because we know this is a big issue. And these are some case presentations and outcomes that we want to measure. And this is what we're doing right now. And we're already having tremendous results in showing that we can use GLP-1s and either maintain muscle mass or even put muscle mass on in conjunction with other peptides, but even just lifestyle modifications, specifically the ones that I mentioned, like hydration and resistance training. But
Well, that matches my experience, Len. Sorry to cut you off there. I just want to share my experience because I tried the GLP ones, for whatever 6 or 8 weeks, something like that. I did DEXA before, and I did DEXA after, and during that period, I significantly ramped up my hydration, and I was even measuring it on the simple little app I use on my phone. I have this water bottle here, so every time I'd crush the bottle, I'd log 32 ounces. I was going for like 100 or more ounces a day. I was lifting every single day. I was taking protein, and I went back to get my DEXA scan after 8 weeks, and I had put on um, 8 pounds of lean mass, and this was during, the quote unquote uh, GLP-1 protocol. So you're helping me understand the why. It's like, hey, if you're actually lifting and you're hydrating and you're getting adequate protein, you actually have a very good chance of increasing lean mass while you're also doing all these other amazing benefits for cellular energy and metabolism. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we just need to do a
Nice.
better job of showing that. And that's why,
Yeah.
your platform is so important, because it's what I'm going to be utilizing when I'm going to my presentations and when I'm reviewing case studies. I mean, just in a couple of weeks, we'll be at the Peptide World Congress, talking about just this, this topic,
Awesome.
spending a lot of time on cellular hydration. But to your point, utilizing other peptides that improve your own endogenous physiological secretion of growth hormone, like CJC
Hmm.
and ipamorelin, is a
Yeah,
tremendous tool. And if you look
that's the
at
one I
peptides,
use.
yeah, and if you look at peptides or any GHRH or GHRP, it's a combination of a growth hormone releasing hormone or a growth hormone releasing peptide. Um, any combination of these, if you look at the cell signaling capabilities, or if you look at some of the biochemistry of what's happening with a lot of these peptides, well, it's going to sound very familiar. They're increasing AMPK, they're increasing
Mhm.
SIRT1, they're improving that NAD plus to NADH ratio. So they're working on a lot of these same pathways that we're also mimicking. The difference here is that when you can improve growth hormone secretion, growth hormone is catabolic to fat tissue and anabolic to muscle tissue, which is
Yep.
so important, right? So we're doing both things that we're looking to accomplish. We're hitting the AMPK side of things, specifically to fat tissue, and it also has this other enhanced side of what it has effect on muscle, right? And so improvement in your body's ability to secrete your own growth hormone and pulse it out
Exactly.
naturally the way that it's meant to be can have a pronounced effect. Now, not just necessarily muscle building, it's going to have a great effect on muscle, but it's really improving somebody's exercise capacity, because we already talked about how important exercise is. Like that's not new news to anybody. But what we can do that's tremendous is help people exercise, help their exercise capacity, help them exercise better, utilize some of these tools like GHRHs and GHRPs. Because it's not just the exercise that they're doing, but it's how fast can they recover. As we age, you know that you just don't
Yeah.
recover as fast as you wanted to, and that's where these peptides really come into play, is improving the way people exercise and improving how fast they can recover. Because you can get people to lose weight really fast on GLP-1s, right? Everybody's has figured that out so far, but it's really about what can you do to their exercise capacity, because once they lose all that weight, now if they want to have all those health benefits of improving markers like VO2 max, that is such an important marker for longevity, well, the gains from that point are going to be really reliant on how well they can exercise. And so providing these different compounds and peptides to improve their exercise capacity is really key. And then that's really the strategy we take with CJC Apomorelin. It's improving a ton of things. It works on stage 4 deep sleep. It's got a lot of benefits for the brain and a number of different things. But if you're talking about just specifically muscle, it's amazing in that it's catabolic to fat tissue and anabolic to muscle tissue, which is the opposite of something like cortisol, right? And this is why sleep and stress management is so important. Because what does cortisol do? Cortisol is anabolic to fat tissue and catabolic to muscle tissue. It's doing the opposite, and so
Yeah.
that's why it's such an amazing peptide.
Well, it helps you understand why stress actually, if you're in a high stress situation, stressor could be emotional, it could be physical, it could be environmental. But if your body's under stress and you're trying to make gains in terms of your physical health or body composition, you can see that stress actually does the opposite. It's making it easier to put on fat, and it's having a detrimental effect on muscle. And then I remember from your presentation, that was one of the things I took away, that the growth hormone, GHRH, GHRP, that's the opposite. It's making it easier for you to put on muscle. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, the only other hormone I believe that you said that can do that is testosterone,
Right.
if my memory serves me correctly.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
We're not talking about taking that here,
Yeah.
but for people to understand that that's also one of the things that has that dual action: pack on muscle, kill fat.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. What's another way that we can improve testosterone outside of using exogenous testosterone? And it's lifting heavy things that has a pronounced effect on it. So it's
I love
it's
it.
just it all comes together.
Yeah, you got to go do the squats. You got to go do the bench press. You got to put things in your hands that are heavy. Like let's define resistance training, and depending on where you're at physically, a lot of people who haven't lifted before, or they may be at a stage of life where they're either frail. So you have to be careful in some cases with strength training, but to really goose the testosterone when you go in the gym, for me, I'm looking at putting some heavy weight on the squat rack,
Mhm.
and I want to be struggling to get that fifth rep up. So I'm going to do 5 sets of 5 reps, and it's going to be heavy enough that like it is seriously hard when I'm getting into those last couple sets and those last couple reps. Or I'll do pull-ups that activate all the muscles in like the back, biceps, shoulders. Or I'll do barbell bench press, for example. Again, putting enough weight on there that I'm really struggling, and that when I come back a few days later recovered, I'm able to put on another 5 or 10 pounds.
Mhm.
So that type of training for me is what I consider the best ways to increase testosterone. Would you want to add anything to that or change anything with like the best type of training for testosterone
No,
increase?
yeah, you nailed it, and you're very fortunate and lucky to be able to exercise like that, and that's because of what the work that you've done to get there, and that's a great point, because a lot of people are completely sedentary when we talk to them or when our physicians talk to them,
Mhm.
and they're starting from a different point, and that's why utilizing some of these peptides are so important, because you can take someone that's sedentary and just getting them to move around is going to make a big difference. There's a study showing that if you can get someone that's completely sedentary to working out 90 minutes per week, which is 13 minutes per day, you've decreased their mortality rate by 14%. So even in getting someone to just start moving, you're making a significant
Yep.
impact. And this is what we're talking to our physicians about, as to everybody's going to be on a different spectrum. That you're on this side of the spectrum, and it's amazing that you can do those things. But we're going to have patients coming in on the other side of the spectrum, and we have to build this base to hopefully get them to one point where they are doing, maybe using some bands and getting some more
Yeah,
resistance training. Because something that's really important is that you don't want to get hurt, right? And that
yeah,
brings us to like the next peptide
totally.
that's so important, which is BPC 157, right? And
Yeah,
there's many reasons why we utilize this in, it's more known for gut health, and it's known for injuries and things like that. But another thing that's not talked about enough is that BPC actually upregulates growth hormone receptors and works on growth hormone receptor density, especially in tendon fibroblasts.
you
And
mentioned
so
that
this,
on your training, and it's the first time I'd heard it before.
yeah, and that's why it goes so well with the GHRH and GHRPs. Not only are you improving your own endogenous secretion of growth hormone, but you're actually upregulating these receptors, right? So making it much more efficient. But what I love about it is that it's almost like it works as an injury prevention, or of course they use it in injury recovery. But if you can improve, if you can improve or make it safer for people to exercise, or make it safer or better for them to recover, because when do a lot of injuries happen? When people aren't fully recovered, right? When they're not 100% and they come in the next day and their technique is not as good. And so
Yeah.
that's why something like BPC can be tremendous for recovery, improving, improving the growth hormone secretagogues as well. And so that's another really important one that we love to add to a lot of physicians and then their protocols.
Yeah, so we've hit the GLP-1s, we've hit leucinergy, low dose leucine, we've hit the growth hormone peptides. We've talked about BPC, we've talked about the importance of strength training, and
Yes.
also just the importance of movement. Wherever you're at today, any movement is better than no movement, and it works. There are lots of different reasons that helps. There's also two other things I wanted to ask you about as part of the stack, Len, depending on time here. Caloric restriction. That's kind of the mother of all, right? That's where at the beginning of the show you said, wow, when you're fasting, and I love doing 72-hour fasts, I do them once a quarter.
Mhm.
And when I get like 48 hours in, my brain is just like on another level of supercharge.
Yeah.
So I don't do it all the time, but when I do, it's really quite a wild. It's actually a pretty wild experience because your body's kind of in this fight or flight mode, but it's also in like this supercharge mode where all kinds of different like catecholamine brain stuff is going on. So maybe you could comment. And again, the whole thing is like, hey, I want to approach a protocol for weight loss and lean mass growth. And I know I
Mhm.
can do one thing. I can do fasting, or I can do exercise, or I can do GLP-1. But what we're laying out here is like you can exponentially increase the results, when you start building these stacks. And so the other one in the stack was caloric restriction.
Mhm.
Uh, Anecdotally, Len, I know that from some of the research I've read where they found what's the number one thing we could do to increase longevity. I believe this was done in like mice or rats or something like that. And of all the
Mhm.
stuff we had a name for out there, the one thing that worked the best was not eating. So maybe you can just like throw a couple words in on like how does caloric restriction work so good for body recomposition and for
Yeah.
energy levels and just in general, and how do you throw that in the stack safely, because one of the things with GLP is you're not hungry, and you got to be
Mhm.
careful that you're maintaining nutrient density and protein, and so then you throw fasting in and it's like, well, I want to make sure that I'm still getting enough nutrients in my body. So how do you slot that one in?
Yeah, and it boils down to what we talked about at the beginning, is if you create this deficit of energy, and your cells sense that and activate AMPK, you have all those downstream effects that are almost identical to exercise, with autophagy, cleaning cells out,
I love it.
um, upregulating a number of different beneficial catabolic things, that is so beneficial in weight loss. And the way that we approach this, actually, when we first started doing this, one of our first protocols, like our initial protocol program that we put together, was we would have people do like a 5-day fasting mimicking diet, or a 3-day water fast to start. And I mean, the results were amazing, because they would just clean out their cells. They would we'd have all these positive benefits, and then we'd utilize peptides, and then just their cells were firing way better than if they didn't do that. we stopped doing that because it was just too tough for people to start there, especially if you're getting someone to start a new lifestyle and you're asking them to go on this intense fast at the beginning. We just didn't have the success rate. The outcomes were amazing, but people just couldn't stick to it. Now, where we use this is clinically, it's very dependent on where that patient is at, especially with
100%.
their insulin resistance, if they're diabetic, if they're pre-diabetic, and we'll try to utilize something like intermittent fasting or caloric restriction. Caloric restriction can be a number of different things, just minimizing the
Yep.
amount of calories. It can be minimizing the amount of hours that you eat in a day. But we really leave that up clinically to where they're at, right? So in patients like
Understood.
diabetic or pre-diabetes, they seem to have a great, a much better effect with carbohydrate restriction, specific carbohydrates, or with caloric restriction. If we see in their lab work that they're having, they have really high hyperinsulinemia, things like that, where we're really trying to change things and change things quickly for them, we'll incorporate something like that. It also depends a lot on when we get back their body composition metrics, right? Well,
Yeah.
where are they at with muscle mass? Sometimes you have
Yep.
patients that are metabolically unstable. They have plenty of muscle. So am I too concerned with losing a little bit of muscle while getting them metabolically stable? No, I'm not. I'm fully aware of how important muscle mass is to longevity, but it really depends on where they're at in that spectrum. Um, and another key point there is, there's plenty of studies showing that muscle strength is more important than muscle mass. So they're both important. But
Makes
perfect
sense.
example. Yeah, perfect example. I just had someone come in that was, morbidly obese, wanted to lose some weight, utilizing GLP-1s and some of the other things that we're talking about, and they lost in the first month. It was actually have it up on my board here. Put it over his results. It was they lost 11 pounds of fat tissue and 3 pounds of muscle mass. Right. So was I concerned with that 3 pounds of muscle mass they lost at the same time while losing 11 pounds of fat tissue? No, because they were adequately muscled. Right. And in the same time period, they had gotten stronger because we got them doing resistance training. So was there any negative effects there? No, because the studies are very clear that muscle strength is even more important than muscle mass. And so those are some of the things that we're looking at clinically to assess how we're going to go about using things like caloric restriction. And it also works a little bit differently for everybody. Like I do really well with caloric restriction. It's just
Yep.
a matter of, there's some key things that you just we're not gonna sacrifice for it. Is it causing us to not get enough protein in? Is it causing us not the ability to not exercise or use resistance training? Is it affecting our hydration status, right? Because there's a lot of water in food, and when you caloric restrict, your water intake is less. And something that
Yep.
people don't know about GLP-1s is that it reduces thirst intake, right?
Yep.
Or it
I've
reduces
noticed
water
that
intake.
as well. I've got to be really mindful of making sure that
Yeah,
I'm hydrating
it's one
properly.
of the key components that we do, and then and hydration is so important with cell signaling. If you're utilizing peptides, if you want to protect muscle, if you want to improve protein synthesis, and increasing the volume of the cell is really putting it in the state of it's most efficient way of signaling. It improves protein synthesis. It improves anabolic signaling compared to if someone is dehydrated or has low intracellular water and they have cell shrinkage, and then you have a catabolic effect, and now it could be degrading muscle. So hydration is so important when it comes to muscle strength and muscle mass. So as long as all those pieces are in place, I mean, I think caloric restriction is great, especially intermittent fasting. It just really depends on where you're at. And so one quick point on this is we don't stick to a specific protocol, right? So when people come in and they're maybe metabolically unstable or we need to lose some weight rapidly, we might use caloric restriction, we might use intermittent fasting, but we'll get that weight off and we'll get them to a more metabolically stable position. And now we'll pivot over to having more meals per day, maybe not caloric restricting. Because why? Because
Yep.
their exercise capacity has gone up, their metabolic rate has gone up. Now we have lost the fat tissue that we want to lose. Now we want to focus on muscle mass. So we're not doing
Yep.
as much caloric restriction. So it really
Absolutely agree.
depends, where they're at in that spectrum. But it's just such an effective tool, such an effective tool.
Yeah, it's all part of personalizing it. I have a family member I'm working with right now that we're at the opposite end of the spectrum. Like the most important thing is to be putting on lean mass. And so I guess that's just where each individual is a little different. But just in the context of like all the things that really hit the pathways. We've covered a lot of them. Caloric restriction was the last one. There's one more I want to ask you about, Len, and then maybe we could just spend a few minutes educating people on how to actually make sure that they're measuring the right things when they do this. So the last one was sadly the one that I do not tolerate very well. But you had
Yeah.
also mentioned the ability to layer in MOTS C, and that would be done to increase again the capacity for exercise and exercise performance. So that was the last one I wanted to throw into the whole blender here on different ways we can maximize our results. Comments on just how MOTS-C fits into the equation?
Yeah. So it's too bad that you can't take that one. It's my
I
personal
tried
favorite.
twice. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I had a horrible experience twice.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so MOTS is a mitochondrial peptide, and I would say it's probably the closest one to an exercise mimetic because if you look at what
Yeah.
it's doing, it's working. It's doing a number of different things. They were studying it in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. They were studying it in cancer. But if you look at what it's doing, it's working directly on AMPK, right? So same system. But MOTS has been shown to improve glucose uptake. It's insulin sensitizing. It inhibits something called myostatin, which has everything to do with muscle. So not only is it working on metabolism and glucose and insulin dynamics, it's improving fat loss. It's improving has positive effects on muscle. And really, the reason that I take it, the reason that we utilize it, or a lot of practitioners are utilizing it, is in this concept of exercise capacity. Taking it 2 to 3 times a week, 30 minutes before exercise, people really, really feel that improvement in the way that they exercise and in their endurance. And there's some, preclinical models showing that as to it improving endurance, improving the ability to exercise better. And so really that's when we utilize it, and a lot of the physicians utilize it, is to really increase exercise capacity. And it's an amazing peptide.
All right. Well, that's the one that I sadly won't be able to dabble with, but I've got enough going on with all the other improvements I've made, and I don't come from a family with genetics that are naturally tending to be lean. Quite the opposite. So it's taken me a long time to figure out the right algorithm, but what I've come to the conclusion is that when you start to understand the tools that we've talked about here today, and you start to know how to properly implement those and work with a practitioner who can help you do it safely and effectively, it becomes clear that there's absolutely no reason why your body composition, your health status should not continue to get significantly better as you age. Even as the body's aging, what these cellular compounds do is help us to continue to get to that next peak of optimal. And at 47 years old, I can say that I have the best body composition I've ever had. But more importantly, when I get all my blood work run and I look at my lipid panels and I look at my insulin markers and I look at my hemoglobin A1C, those are also the numbers that say, okay, there's the part of it that's like just looking good and feeling good, right? That's just
Yeah.
awesome out there in life, just being at your best physically. But then when you get the blood work run, so when I did my first protocol, I went and got my labs done afterwards. The cholesterol and in heads up, I have my data going back to like 20 years at this point. So like I could see that like my numbers were better at 47 than they've ever been in my entire life. And that's when you start to really see that like okay, this really is powerful. And when you start to get the metabolism dialed in and healthy, and you start to get body composition dialed in and healthy, and you start to use all of these things, the whole system as a whole, the whole instrument, is just tuned at a higher frequency. And the results have been amazing for me personally. So I guess maybe that's a segue, Lynn, to say, what are you really looking at for outcomes? You can. It's not just stepping on the scale. And honestly, if I used scale weight as my assessment of progress in my protocol, I think I've actually gone up. So like I'd say, hey, this GLP-1 shit doesn't work at all. But then I see how my clothes are fitting, and it's totally different. So help us understand how to properly measure it so that we don't misinterpret the data. Because I would have totally misinterpreted scale weight in and of itself. But there's so
Mhm.
much else going on that's getting better. So, like, I know you're measuring these outcomes. What are you specifically looking at?
So some of a lot of attention to body composition metrics, of course,
Hmm.
and we're now starting to look a lot at total body water, intracellular water, in relationship to because we're starting to see the research behind how important cellular hydration is to muscle performance, muscle strength, and a number of different things, especially with the use of GLP-1s, but just in general, in cardiometabolic, there's a lot of things at there, and we get that good data from using something like an InBody, but paying a lot of attention to visceral fat scores, to the amount of
Yep.
lean mass they have,
Yep.
the amount of fat tissue they have, and making sure that everything's going in the right direction. And it's a lot of fun to look at that as well with some key um, biomarkers with like hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin levels. We can see the insulin and glucose dynamics changing for people. We can see that their efficiency is getting better. Looking at other markers that show us insulin resistance you might not think about when it comes to lipid panels, when it comes to triglycerides and HDL ratios, because that's one thing that people don't realize is sometimes you don't see the insulin resistance in glucose and insulin levels, and it's because it's showing up in triglycerides. Because what happens when we can't get glucose into the cell, or we get muscle insulin resistant? Well, you get fat accumulation in the liver, right? And so we're looking at LFTs, we're looking at triglycerides and HDLs, and making sure that all that's moving in the right direction. Those are probably the main ones, and ApoB, just because cardiovascular disease is the number one killer. And assessing someone's risk and assessing someone's tendency for atherosclerosis or risk for atherosclerosis. So those are some of the main ones that we're taking a look at right now, because it goes along. We haven't talked about the immune system, we haven't talked about gut health or autoimmunity, but there's this new kind of study of immunometabolism and how getting metabolism optimized, what effect that has on autoimmune
Wow.
disease or
Awesome.
immune issues or gut health issues. And so right now
Yeah.
we're focusing on metabolism, but we have some case studies where we're following patients with autoimmune disease, with gut health issues, and seeing if we can maximize and optimize their metabolism, what is that doing for some of their other things that they're dealing with, like their autoimmune disease or gut health issues. And so body composition just tells us so much as to, I mean, there's no pure way of knowing if you're biochemistry of in somebody's body by their body composition actually changing for the better. And it's something that we're focusing on right now, but there's so many things that you can measure on Heads Up. And thank you so much for providing something like that, because if it wasn't for something like that, I mean, for me, just a peace of mind when I go in there and I see a certain lab value and I wonder, hey, what was I like when I was in like my 20s? And it's pulling that data from, some of the other lab companies, when I was not even looking at my results, and seeing
Hmm.
how I've been trending. And I'm just like you. I have the best body composition that I've ever had at 42 years old. And it's just getting better and better. And a big part of that is tracking those outcomes. And it's such an efficient, such an amazing tool that you're providing, and it's making a huge difference in how we educate practitioners, because there's not as much data as you would see in a typical pharmaceutical company or a pharmaceutical drug. There's not as the money's not behind it, and so using your platform and following these outcomes makes a huge difference for when we're out there teaching or out there presenting to other physicians, for them to get on board with this new form of cellular medicine that incorporates exercise and nutrition and a number of different things. And it's super valuable. So thank you so much for what you're providing out there.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Len, for all the amazing education that you're putting out there. And part of the goal for Heads Up, initially it was to help people better self-manage their stats, especially when they were doing non-standard interventions. So initially it was designed for people to use to make sure that they're doing things properly. But another major goal for Heads Up was to have the data to show that these protocols work as good or better than what we have. And the only way that's going to happen is if guys like you get in there and start putting in the in-body scans and putting in all the blood work and putting in all the CGM data and finding data outcomes we may not even have seen, because in a lot of, even with drug discovery and clinical trials, they might not be putting everybody on an in-body scanner every 3 months, and they might not necessarily be running some of the more advanced labs or looking at the heart rate variability or anything like that. So I actually think we're in a position where we're going to have better data and more comprehensive data, and that's
Oh,
where I think
that is such
we can help.
that's just such a good point, because even all the studies with GLP-1s, did they do any body composition data? Like there's like almost zero, right? And it's like, what did that really tell us, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, you're right. You make a great point. Some of our data and some of the presentations that we make are even more compelling than some of the research that's out there because of what we're tracking. It's a great point.
Well, this is just like something that I'm on a massive nerd safari on,
Hmm.
with all of this cellular medicine peptide stuff. Once you go down the rabbit hole, it's just crazy and awesome. So
Yeah.
I'm loving every second of it. And I'll see you, Len, in a few weeks in Malibu for the conference. I'm looking forward to your presentation there today. And this was awesome. We covered everything I was hoping we could cover. The talk I studied was really educational and inspirational for me, because it helped me fill in so many blanks about not just how can I get results, but it's how can I exponentially maximize my results by taking all of these things and putting them together and just kind of like supercharging the stack. So grateful for your time here today, Len. And then if there's anything you want to leave with the audience, just in terms of either how to find you or how to get access to some of the products and services and educational content you put out there, anything you want to leave us with?
Sure. So we work, directly with medical practices and helping them, put together their protocols and helping them out there. So you can just go to newbioage.com to register your practice. We also provide a lot of the supplements that we formulate to enhance peptide therapy. And we'll be working very soon on a, direct to consumer model as well. So, and then some
We're
of
all
our
waiting
education.
for that, Len, because we all want
Yeah.
it. We just
Yeah. I know. I am, I didn't set out to formulate supplements. It wasn't like part of our business plan or anything like that. It was just that, we were looking at the data and it just wasn't available. And so
yeah.
we wanted to test it out. And it's really taken off with a lot of practitioners. And so, yeah, we'll be doing that soon. And some of some of the best education when it comes to cellular medicine is on Seed Scientific Research and Performance. And you can find a lot
Yeah,
of this
we'll link
stuff
to them.
there. Yeah, and I'm a faculty member there, and there's an endless amount of information there that you can really get just the highest level of education when it comes to cellular medicine and peptide therapy.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll link to their website. I've kind of stumbled into that conference last year just at the last minute, and it was awesome. And I imagine this year, from what I'm hearing, is going to be even bigger and better. That whole community is really starting to grow. So um,
Yeah,
we'll link to their website. This was awesome, Len. Thank you, brother, and I'm looking forward to more awesome collaboration with you.
awesome. Thank you so much.